Welcome back, Social 20. So what we talked about last time was really the rise of ultranationalism. And so what we're going to talk about today is what were the responses to that? What kind of changed or what happened and how did the world respond? And so what we're going to look at today, we looked at last time 3 specific countries and how ultranationalism was rising within those. And now we're going to look at what was the response. Here's our lesson objectives for today. So just as a review, what we've talked about, we talked about what ultranationalism is. We've talked about how it developed, and we talked about 3, they're usually ruled by dictators. So if we look at dictators that were in rule throughout, we've looked at Emperor Hirohito in Japan. We've looked at Hitler in Germany and Stalin in Russia. So what we're going to look at today, very briefly, is we're going to look a little bit at expansionism and what were some of the responses to ultranationalism. So when we looked at the countries, we saw there was a rise in ultranationalistic values. Remember, that is, not only are you putting your country's goals ahead of every other goal in other countries, you're also excluding other people who do not belong to your country. So you see this kind of sense of superiority. It's whether it's justified and you have a more productive country or not. And they also are, all 3 countries were defined by an interest in expansionism, and that is the policy of both territorial and economic expansion. So these countries were not just okay to make themselves superior above all else, they also wanted to expand both their ideas, their ideologies, other people around them to join their philosophies, but also to get access to other countries' people, resources, and natural goods. Over here we see Hitler there, basically trying to put his arms around and grab the whole world. Okay, just a quick recap. So we see 1933, we had the Treaty of Versailles given to Germany, and they were given the, I believe the limit was about 100,000 military members. They did not obey that. They did not get rid of all the weapons and soldiers they were supposed to. They began to secretly build up their military again. 1935, they introduced conscription. That is forced military service. So most young males were expected to join and train for the military unless they had a medical reason or some exemption from that. And so the Rhineland was this little kind of area that was in between 2 nations that was not meant to have any military in it. And so the idea was kind of a neutral zone. Nobody goes there. You keep, France and Germany separated. And so what Hitler started to secretly do was remilitarize it, and that puts a stress and a little bit of pressure onto France. He annexed Austria. Annexation means to just go in there and kind of grab the country as part of yours. You don't ask for it. It starts to slowly build. Now we're towards the end of the 1930s. He invaded the Sudetenland and then took the rest of Czechoslovakia. He's going into these places. Why is nobody doing anything? This is all against the Treaty of Versailles. And what we're going to look at today is what is the term for people just turning the blind eye to that. 1939, this was it. He went into Poland, and this was what we call kind of that final straw before World War II is going to break out. And so it happened by going into Poland. So what he had really done is he made a little secret agreement with Russia to say, hey, I'm going to take a little bit of Poland. Why don't you take a little bit too, and then we'll just make an agreement between the 2 of us. And communists and fascists hate each other. But they made this kind of deal because they both got something out of it, and they weren't going to attack if someone went into Poland. They kind of just decided, Poland had no say in this, that they were going to break it up and invade it. So we're going to look at what were some of the reactions around Europe. Of course, we see on top of expansionism, ultranationalism also meant more space. And he believed in this concept called Lebensraum, and it's about living space. So he thought he was very justified by going into the places like Poland, the Sudetenland, and he was just going to take them because he needed more living space for his people. Now, there's a lot of use of force. There's also going into these places with the idea that he was superior and all Germans were above the people that they're taking the land from. And so ethnic cleansing, the term is referring to the use of force to remove or extinguish people of a certain ethnic or religious group from an area. So this was often done in time, putting them all into like one specific area, and they would have to go and live in a camp, throwing people out, threatening, full families to be put in labor camps or killed if they didn't. And so a lot of these groups were basically just extinguished and pushed to the side, a lot of minority groups. When we're talking about Hitler's elimination of minorities, specifically with regards to the Holocaust, it's called the final solution. And Kristallnacht was a very famous event in which he would go into, all of these Jewish shops and threaten all these people who weren't really obeying him and were not going off into the labor camps. And he was going to make sure that everybody obeyed him. And all of the shops were smashed and broken into. And so he really was using a lot of force to get rid of these minorities and just get rid of what he called, the problem. And he was going to come up with this final solution. Okay, so when we looked at Japan, we had seen a resurgence back to traditional values. They were going to get rid of Western ideals, go back into ideals like obedience, willing to die for your country. If you've heard of kamikaze pilots, this is them to the right. They basically dive bomb a plane into very dangerous, risky situations, effectively committing suicide, but your honor was worth that. And they had these sense of ideals that it is okay to die and encouraged to die for your country. So they were honoring the warrior culture, all of the Western ideals, militarism, all of these kind of ideas. And they had a lot of problems economically that they were an island. And so we're going to look at, again, they are going to pursue expansionism. So there was also this sense of ethnic superiority of the Japanese. So when they went into these places, it was not just, okay, we're going to go into Manchuria and we're going to just, take some of their resources. No, it was the people who are living here are below us. They are underneath us. They should subscribe to these Japanese values, and they completely eliminated any sort of display or affection for the previous people's culture, and they squashed that. And so, again, we see two things in common with Germany: sense of harsh expansionism, and again, the ethnic superiority. This is ultranationalism, loyalty to the point of death, idealized. These countries are not allowing people to have any sort of, different opinions that can't be expressed. If you do, you're probably going to die. So we're going to actually look at Italy, which is interesting because they started to develop ideas of fascism. So we look at Japan, and it's under the ideology of what we call militarism, very strong military. But when we look at Germany and Italy, they were actually very closely aligned under what we now call fascism, the ideology of fascism. So communists, and we look at Stalin in Russia, who was a communist. And although it is very starkly obvious that there are comparisons that are very strong, they don't like each other. Communists and fascists don't get along, they hate each other, but they have the same ideas. Italy was going to side with Germany and follow fascism. So because of Mussolini, he was this leader in charge, and Italy was very divided geographically, and they kind of felt like they had not gotten a great deal out of World War I, and so they wanted to expand. And Italy wanted to do this very strongly too. So they had a sense of ultranationalism developing, Italian nationalism turned into ultranationalism. And then Mussolini was in charge, Benito Mussolini. He came to power, and he was a very strong fascist. And so he started to use these very similar methods, such as expansionism and elimination of anybody who doesn't agree with his ideas. So he goes into this area called Abyssinia. This is in 1935. And so they started to just kind of take these little areas around them. Italy annexed all of Albania, despite a long-standing alliance. And so we see these countries that are starting to use these methods. Okay, so up here it's Abyssinia. This is in Africa, by the way. This is not actually in Italy. But we are going to talk about why. So we had a League of Nations. Where were they? Okay. Okay, so when we talk about Italy, they believed in superiority of the Italian people, return of this kind of great Roman Empire, the return to the great days of, that sense of almost moving backwards. They also believed in expansionism. Fear and intimidation was kind of like this kind of what we would now call a modern day terrorist group that had a lot of persuasion. They were all about fear. If you didn't support 100% Italian nationalism and the growth of Italy, then you don't act out around that. You're expected to have ultra obedience to that. So what did these have in common? I think that we can, when we talk about Italy and we talk about Germany, we talk about Japan, the rise of ultranationalism, we could even include Russia, has included a few common themes. One, we see expansionism. We have to include expansionism as one of the characteristics of ultranationalism. We have to include a sense of superiority because we see them wanting to eliminate another group. And the third one we see is a sense of absolute devotion and loyalty to the state. It's expected. Okay, so they had different goals and different means of doing it, but those are three things that we can definitely associate with ultranationalism, which is also helpful in any writing that you do on a source analysis. So how do countries respond? Well, what we had seen was after World War I, countries were very strong in their demands against Germany, but then they didn't all, especially USA, they didn't feel like it was really maybe a great situation to put Germany in. And so what they kind of thought, well, we really were hard on Germany after World War I. We gave her the war guilt clause and we made her give up all these colonies. So why don't we just let them take a little bit of land? And so what they kind of thought was that they had been through an awful world war, that did not want to repeat all of the loss of life, all of the money and the financials and all of the infrastructure that was destroyed, and the whole world could not move forward. And so Neville Chamberlain, he's the PM of Great Britain, he's in this picture here shaking Hitler's hand, was really a proponent of just giving in. Okay, we don't want another war, just give them the Sudetenland, or don't worry about the fact that they went into Czechoslovakia. And so the term that we use when you give in to somebody is appeasement. So it's giving in to someone's demands in the hopes that war won't happen. Sometimes this works. Sometimes you give somebody a little bit what they want, they kind of go away. But then you can have the other reaction, which can be you give a little bit and then they want more. And that is what happened with Hitler. So they were trying to avoid war. They gave in. They followed a policy of appeasement. They tried to be nice. And then what did it lead to? More war. So that was how, unfortunately, the response was handled to ultranationalism. We were not educated yet as to what the horrors would be behind some of the policies of someone like Hitler. He didn't make those known, and so they were trying to avoid a war, and instead we ended up creating a larger war. So we're going to continue to examine.
If you enjoyed this video, check out our website online.plrd.ab.ca and visit us on Facebook, Prairieland Online Academy. You can find out all that's going on with Prairieland Online Academy.